Yes, I now feel that it was then on that evening of sweet dreams that the very first dawn of human love burst upon the icy night of my spirit. Since that period, I have never seen nor heard your name without a shiver half of delight, half of anxiety. Greetings, Poe fans. I am Carmen Bolden.
And I am Jeanie Smith.
And we are the Potastic 2. And we are back to recognize Valentine's Day in To Poe
with Love.
Yes. The quote I just read was actually from Poe in a letter to Sarah Helen Whitman, and we will talk about her in just a few moments when we get into our discussion.
And according to research, she's not kin to Walt Whitman. I actually was curious about that, but we couldn't find any connection. Sorry.
Yes.
Throw that in there.
Yeah, so if she is kin to him and married somewhere in so many degrees of separation, we apologize.
Yes, we couldn't find it in our quick little research.
Yes. So Jeanie is going to start us off with a history on Valentine's, because Valentine's Day is in a very, very, I'm trying to think of the word, personal and important day to Jeanie, because she was born on Valentine's Day.
Yes, I was. And it was a miracle in its making, because I was born 2 weeks early. And it was on a Wednesday. It was snowing really, really bad, so that was kind of cool, because I love the cold months. But yes, I was born on Valentine's Day. My brother was born on St. Patrick's Day, which I asked my mom.
That's so very ironic in a way.
And we're not Catholic, but we're born on Saint's Day. Okay. But the nice little history, there are different kinds of legends, and anybody that's ever thought about looking up Valentine's Day to see where it came from will find different legends, myths, those kinds of things. But the more, I guess, substantial one they've kept with is based on Saint Valentine's, the priest who was locked up.
Yeah.
Of course, the way they go, because at that time there's several different things. One was that he was performing marriages to keep men from having to serve in the military. And
that's really interesting.
Yes, the emperor, I just blanked on his name. I think it was Claudius.
I think, that's what
Claudius the second, I believe.
Yeah.
Imprisoned him because he was keeping men out of service. And the other thing that they came from Valentine's Day was because while he was in jail, apparently he had performed a miracle on the jailer's daughter and cured her blindness, and he wrote her letter saying, "From your Valentine."
Oh, that's really neat.
So that's kind of a little bit of history with the mythology. But as we know, Valentine's Day today, it's mostly a commercialized hearts and candy and flowers. And it's a great capitalist economical wonderland for money in a free society that we live in, which is, there's nothing wrong with that. No. Don't get me wrong. I love my flowers. I love my chocolate.
Absolutely.
But the difference is that Socrates is actually one of the earliest philosophical gurus of love, because he, in 2,400 years ago, in a symposium in Plato's, he was taught, teaching his crowd about to love all men. And so that was
okay.
He said, "I've never met anyone I've never been in love with." So
that's a neat philosophy to think about, and that I wish that was the philosophy of most people today.
Yes, society today really needs to have some Socrates in their life.
Yes, that we should put that on a bumper sticker.
It should. Everybody needs a little Socrates in their life.
Yes.
There we go. That should be it. But yeah, that's just a little tidbit of the history behind Valentine's Day.
Okay.
And it kind of bloomed from there. No pun intended about the flowers.
Exactly. Right. And one of the things that Poe uses in a lot of his poetry are flowers and things with nature. A lot of natural things in his stories, even too.
Oh yes, very much so. He is definitely paying homage to his loves of his life, because he's one of the things that with Poe, and we've talked about this with his tragedies in life, is his seeking out of love. I mean, you can tell from any of his poetry, there is a desperation of wanting something, of needing something from someone, and he says it with love.
He does, and which sometimes it's very melancholy, but at the same time, it all goes back into those roots of real emotional love that is sacred to yourself and how you use it. Yeah. Basically.
And most everyone is taught how to love from an early age, from the very beginning, by those of their family, those parents, those guardians, those influencers of their life. Unfortunately, with Poe, he did not have that because his mother died when he was 2.
3.
I
think it was 3.
Yeah, 2 or 3.
Yeah, and Eliza Poe, and she died of tuberculosis, and how, very coincidental that his wife many years later died of the same thing.
Yeah, it's very prominent back then. That was pretty much the disease that took most people because it was highly contagious.
Exactly, yeah.
But, Poe never really got that because his first love, and we can trace this back to the Oedipus complex, was his mother.
Yes.
And even though he was young, by 3 years old, she was the first female love of his life. And then he lost her tragically, and then he was thrust into
his foster family with the Allens, and Frances Valentine Allen, also known as Fanny, was his foster mother, and she inspired him to, use his creativity. He would recite poems for her, and she highly encouraged him to keep doing that until, she died, and also supporting his art. And so he didn't, get to, I guess, she was a mother influence, but at the same time, she wasn't there as long as, he would have liked. Longer than his mother, though.
Yeah, she was around a little bit longer, but once more, he lost her tragically.
Exactly.
And at a young age. I mean, we could still be in our 60s if we still, our mother could be in our 90s, and if we lost them, it's still a tragedy.
Exactly.
Because that is the one person that you will unconditionally feel love from, or should.
Yes. Throughout your whole life.
From the day of your birth until the day of either their death, her death, or your death.
Exactly. And I think Jeanie and I both can definitely empathize with Poe, because I lost my mother when I was 24. And Jeanie, how old were you?
I was 35.
Yes. So, I mean, I barely had started to have more of an adult relationship with my mother, and you had very little.
Yeah, I was just in the middle of that relationship where it was coming out of the mother-daughter and into the friends and the growth of that relationship. Because even females, males with their mothers, their fathers, and all this, you go through different stages.
You do, definitely.
You have the early years that you're developing, and then you have the teenage rebellion years where you're pushing the boundaries.
Exactly.
And, these are all qualities of a development of life. These are life stages.
Exactly.
And anytime there's an interruption, anytime there is a problem that happens in that time, it affects both parties.
Absolutely. I totally agree.
And with Poe, you can definitely see it in his poetry.
Oh, exactly. And kind of speaking of his poetry, one of the ladies, one of his school friends, the child's mother's name was Jane Stannard, and Poe was mesmerized by her to the point of her charms, everything about her. He basically fell in love with her and was spellbound. And his first To Helen poem, he has 2, is dedicated to her, and it's all about her and his love for her, and that was published in 1831. Yeah. And again, looking for that motherly influence and inspiration, and that search for it for his whole life.
Yeah, and we all know that if any of our friends that were growing up, if we hung out at their houses, they hung out at ours, you have the influence of their parents as well as your parents in your life. And I've had many, many very close relationships with the parents of my closest friends. And it was because I was seeing them not as a replacement, not as a stand-in, so to speak. Yeah. But it was just another page to the story of my growth and seeing, like Socrates says, I've never met someone I never loved.
Right. I kind of had the same thing. My parents had some very, very close sets of friends, and those ladies influenced me heavily, and still think extremely highly of them till this day. One has passed and one is still alive. I don't get to communicate like I used to, and which is a shame, and it's bad, but that's a whole nother story.
But life has a way of making decisions that you don't necessarily want them to make.
Exactly. And so I think, yes, when you do lose a parent, you are searching for that continually for the rest of your life, really.
Yeah, you are missing a piece of your own puzzle that won't be replaced until you've met them again.
Right, exactly. And then basically, once Poe kind of grew up, Jane Stannard passed away. I mean, it wasn't like he wasn't seeing her every day and that kind of thing. But then, Francis Allen died. He was kind of on his own until he got married. And then his aunt, Maria Clem, known as Muddy, and became his mother-in-law when he married Virginia. And she was probably the most influential motherly figure in his life, because when times were good, when times were bad, she was always there for him.
Yeah, and that's the typical definition of a mother figure.
An unconditional love.
Exactly.
Yes. And Poe paid tribute to her not long before he died in 1849 with a sonnet called To My Mother. And that was for Muddy, not for any of the other motherly figures in his life.
Yeah, because with Virginia, he probably had Muddy more than any of the other ones.
He did.
Because not only was he getting the love from her because she was his aunt, but he was feeling that love because she was his mother-in-law. She was the mother figure, and he saw the way she interacted with Virginia.
Yes.
And then she gave him some of the same love. And so he finally got the true feeling of a mother relationship. Exactly.
And I think he was always afraid of, am I going to disappoint her? Because she always was there trying to, cheer him on, his biggest cheerleader. And with that, talking about the inspirations for Poe, and with talking about Valentines and love, one thing that we kind of looked at was who influenced Poe to write some of the poems he wrote. And Byron was huge influence when he was younger, and this is mainly in some of his poems when he first started writing as a child, teen, that kind of thing. He kind of mimicked the style of Byron and had longer types of poems, but then he kind of moved away from that, and the poems became shorter, sometimes. But one of the I guess best homages to Byron for Poe was in his early rendition of Tamerlane. He made the heroine, the character's name was Ada, and so that was Byron's daughter. And so I thought that was really kind of cool. And so just we looked up one of the poems that Poe kind of basically says, this is why I think Byron is such a great poet. He respected him, his huge influence when Poe wrote The Poetic Principle. And this was stanzas to Augusta. And so I'm just going to read the first stanza, and it does speak of love. So here we go. Though the day of my destiny's over, and the star of my fate hath declined, thy soft heart refused to discover the faults which so many could find. Though thy soul with my grief was acquainted, it shrunk not to share it with me. And the love which my spirit hath painted, it never hath found but in thee. And that, you can tell, that's Byron. Poe's writing is very similar to that.
Well, and as well as I do, that the best accolade to anyone is to imitate.
Absolutely.
And if anyone wanted to show some type of imitation to a true leader, it would be to Lord Byron.
Yes.
Because he, at that time, was the cornerstone of poetry.
Oh, yes.
And
absolutely.
especially of love. And I mean, I'm not shading any of the female poets or anybody else of that poetry, you know, because Lord Byron is one of my faves myself.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, because, you know, Mary Shelley is the bomb diggity.
Yes.
But at that time, he was truly the stepping stone into poetry, whereas, you know, you had Shakespeare and his plays, which in their own right is iambic pentameter with its own poetry level.
Right, and Poe used some iambic pentameter sometimes.
Yeah. But the best way to show your love for someone is through imitation, and that was his throw out there to Lord Byron. It's like, dude, my soul imitates you, loves you. This is my homage.
Yes, absolutely. And with kind of looking at all of these influences of Byron and all the motherly figures, Poe also had several women that he was either interested in, as in, you know, love interest, or as just friends that had similar interest as well in writing and poetry and editing and things like that.
Yeah, and we all know that we've met people over the years that they may have only stayed a few times, but they've had some influence in our lives, whether it's a quick jolt of chemistry or whether it's a long-term, you know, admiration for their ideas, for their intelligence, for their, you know, strength, whatever it may be.
Absolutely.
Although I can see Poe being an early stalker.
Yes.
I'm sorry, but just reading some of his poems and knowing some of the background, it's like, dude.
Well, and I mean, there are rumors that, you know, he would take the same type of, you know, love letter or poem, you know, and change the name and give it to different girls when he was in school and that kind of thing. There's rumors of that.
You know, he'd be a lazy stalker.
Yes. But so some of the women who influenced him, we'll kind of start with at the beginning. It's actually the beginning and the end. So you might say that this lady represents the alpha and omega of Poe.
Yep.
Sarah Elmira Royster Shelton, and that's her. Shelton is her married name. He knew her as, you know, growing up kids. They were neighbors, lived close by, and they had a romantic interest in each other. And then he went off to school in University of Virginia. And her father was not real happy about him being engaged or secretly engaged or whatever you want to call it. And so he hid his letters to Elmira, and then they broke up. She married someone else, and the poem Lenore that he published in 1831 is pretty much said to be kind of about her marriage to this older gentleman that she was kind of forced into marrying to get her away from Poe. And so if you read the lines in it, you can definitely tell Poe's
heartache.
Yes.
I mean, the sheer heartache of knowing that you had a plan, that you were going to go off to university, you had a love there waiting for you when you got back, you were planning and all this, and then to know that there was that parental interference, and at that time, and there's even some instances of it in today's time period.
Exactly.
Of where your parents want you to have certain people that in your life, and apparently Elmira's father was not a big fan of Poe.
Exactly.
And had another path that she should have taken, and at that time, he was a big influence on her life and controlling even. So poor Poe got left out in the cold yet again.
Yes, exactly.
You know,
it's very sad, and that was I believe about the same time that his foster mother Frances was becoming ill and that kind of thing. So that's a lot to going on in a young person's life.
Yeah, it seems that it was Poe's level of tragedy all over again.
Yeah, exactly. And so then, you know, we'll kind of move to his wife, Virginia Eliza Clem. You know, he knew her pretty much his whole life. They were cousins, first cousins. And, I think at first they loved each other just with a familial love, but then when Nielsen Poe who was another cousin, became interested in her, he decided that, well, nope, I want her as my wife. And so
that's just creepy. But
yeah,
okay.
but it was more accepted back then.
Yeah, I know. I understand that from a historical aspect, but
Yes.
it's still just creepy.
I know it is. And, all I can say, one word, and then we'll move on. Habsburgs, and then,
Oh, yeah.
And that's a whole nother, season of episodes that has nothing to do with Poe.
Yeah, and the thing about it is, Poe was not royalty. He was not keeping his line pure, which is all the royalty. That's their main thing.
Exactly.
Let's interbreed, so no one pollutes our line, but you're polluting it yourself. But okay.
But and they didn't have children, so
that was a good thing, I guess.
But they were married, I think around 1836, I believe, and then. So he has several poems that are credited toward her, and one that was written around 1845 and published, Eulalie, a Song. It was definitely most likely about his wife. Really nice poem, and it has a lot of elements of talking about a yellow-haired girl, even though she had dark hair. Just a lot of elements of purple and pearl and violet eye and things like that resonated from that poem. But you can tell the love was there. And then, of course, The Raven was written same time, 1845, and that was kind of the start of Virginia's downfall, of her sickness, of her TB.
When her tuberculosis was starting to get worse.
Yeah. And so you can tell the emotion that he put in the poem of the speaker and how they were suffering from this lost love. And then, of course, the one that is very most known, that to me is the true story of their love of Edgar and Virginia, is Annabel Lee, of course, in 1849.
One of my favorites.
Me too.
And I guess it's just the sheer heartache is jumping off the page in that one. I think that's why it's touched me so much over these years, and even still now, I still get a visual every time I start. I've forgotten the words, most of the words over time, but the still visual that he built from that poem, I can just see this ocean, this bright blue green water swaying in and out, the clouds overhead, the blue skies, the sway of the trees, the wind, and see that stone coffin sitting on the beach.
Yes.
And just imagining him sitting next to it.
Yes.
And all the water that's flowing in and out is like the tears coming from his soul.
Absolutely. I agree.
And knowing that now there's this hardness, there's this impenetrable barrier between him and his part of who he was.
Yes, that part died and was swept away back into the ocean.
Yeah, like his identity has gone.
Yes. And that was really kind of, even though The Raven was, some of the best success he ever saw, it was when she died, a huge part of him died, and his life was never the same after that.
No,
for those last few years.
It's like not only was a part of him and his identity, he himself as a poet died with her.
Yes.
Because that was his muse. That was his go-to, his build-up, his support system, his foundation.
Yeah.
And now it was just a piece of impenetrable concrete around a sea of his sorrow.
Exactly. And the line that always resonated with me, the wind, and I'm not saying this exactly right.
It's okay, we're paraphrasing.
Yes. The wind chilling and killing her and, my Annabel Lee, and just that reference, that allusion to consumption and, that wind that basically took his breath away. Of killing her. Yeah,
because she was his air.
Yes.
She was his breath. She was everything that kept him alive.
Yes.
And now it had taken that part of himself. And so he was just left the shell of a man.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that was part of the thing with tuberculosis in those early days. I mean, it's a highly contagious disease.
And and I thought about that with, rereading that, poem and that kind of thing, and just thinking about her and other people that died from it. It's really a wonder that he didn't get it.
Yeah, it is. It's a miracle that he did not contract it himself. But at the same time, I do believe that tuberculosis definitely is attracted to those with lower immune system. Their lung capacities are not, that they may have had some kind of problems in their younger years with illnesses like pneumonia, bronchitis, and those kinds of things.
Yeah.
So, it's just one of those unexplainable things.
Yeah.
I hate to say it, but we are facing that ourselves today in this society with this COVID. How does it go from one to the other? And even with a vaccine, you can still get sick, but yes, thankfully it will help, curb some of the symptoms, but there's no cure.
No.
Because there's still no cure for the common cold, and that's the one thing that's been around forever, and it's a virus.
Exactly.
So tuberculosis, thank goodness, they managed to find an antibiotic that now sorry, lost my train of thought for a second. I thought I heard something
We had a
slamming.
weird noise.
Yeah, it was weird.
Maybe it's Poe or Virginia.
Yeah. Apparently somebody on the mic had something to say that wasn't us. But yes, I mean, tuberculosis in that time frame, it was a bacterial infection. There has been, many, many different ways of medicine that has come along that can cure tuberculosis and even prevent it. So, that's a good thing in that sense. Unfortunately for Poe, he lost, his mother, influence. He lost his wife.
Exactly. Those were the main two with from tuberculosis. Yeah.
Yes. So.
All right. So kind of moving on to some of the other either friends / love interests that Poe had. Our next lady that we're going to talk about is Frances Sargent Osgood, and she was a poet herself in the 1840s. She met Poe in 1845, but no one is really quite 100% sure what their relationship really was. And so it could have been possible love interest. It could be a mutual attraction, that kind of thing.
Strangers in the night kind of thing.
Yes, exactly. The kismet
one of those
or something.
Mysteries of love kind of thing.
And so, but there are two poems that Poe wrote that definitely are about her. And one is in the collection of works I have of Poe. It says to F, there's a blank, and then lowercase s, then capital S period, capital O, there's a blank space, and D. So it obviously has to be Frances Sargent Osgood. Then in 1846, he also wrote a Valentine. And apparently secretly hidden within the poem is her name. And one of the things, and this kind of also kind of shows, maybe a little bit of what the relationship was. In a letter to her, this is one of the things that he said. Thy grace, thy more than beauty, shall be an endless theme of praise, and love a simple duty. So you can tell that he cared for her in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, I mean, he definitely had some sayings to her beauty, her whole entity itself.
Yes. And probably her poetry.
Yeah, her poetry, because he
could
sought
connect
her
on that level.
He sought her out as a fellow, thespian, a fellow person to enjoy the way of life that he knows. So, and the one good thing is that the one poem that I'm going to read to you that he wrote is called A Valentine.
Yes.
And once more, this is kind of apropos for me, considering I'm a Valentine baby.
And that's why I said she should read it.
So we both read through it ourselves because we were trying to find the cipher or whatever that Poe put in there, the hidden terms, and
the
maybe
clue.
you can hear it. a couple of us, we've looked at it. We think we may have found it, but he does make mention that, if you can't find it by the time of the end of the poem, you will never know.
Yes.
So without further ado, here is A Valentine. For her these lines are penned, whose luminous eyes, brightly expressive as the twins of Leode, shall find her own sweet name that, nestling, lies upon this page enwrapped from every reader. Search narrowly this rhyme, which holds a treasure divine, a talisman, an amulet that must be worn at heart. Search well the measure, the words, the letters themselves. Do not forget the trivialest point, or you may lose your labor. And yet there is in this no Gordian knot, which one might not undo without a saber, if one could merely understand the plot. And written upon this page, whereon are peering such eager eyes, there lies, I say, perdu, a well-known name, oft uttered in the hearing of poets by poets, as the name is a poet's too. Its letters, although naturally lying, like the knight Pinto, Mendez Ferdinando, still form a synonym for truth. Cease trying! You will not read the riddle, though you do the best you can do.
Very nice.
Yes, thank you. It was, I'm still looking for it as I was reading it, going, I think it's an anagram of some sort with the first letters, because
that's kind of what I was thinking too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because with the poem that you said that was like F and blank and all this, and I see the capital F and the
that was
O
the first
and
thing
the L.
I saw. Yes.
Yes. So it
It's
was
there.
Poe. He
There.
loves his little ciphers.
Oh yes.
So check it out. Maybe you can find it.
Exactly. And email us.
Exactly.
And let us know. All right. So some more ladies of Poe, his loves, regardless if it was what type of love.
Yes.
There was Nancy Richmond, whom met Poe in July of 1848.
Mm-hmm.
He was talking to a lot of ladies around that time. And this was right around Virginia's death. So Nancy Richmond was the wife of a Massachusetts paper manufacturer. They had a very platonic relationship, but there was, I think, a mutual attraction there. But they never, acted upon that.
That we know.
Yes, that we know. And then in 1849, he called Nancy Annie. And so he wrote the poem for Annie for her. Mm-hmm. And in 1873, after her husband died, she legally changed her name to Annie.
Curious.
Yes, and to me, that says a whole lot about how she might have felt for Poe.
Yeah, I mean, come on. You're going to legally change your name based on a poem that was written by a so-called platonic.
Yes,
influence.
20-something years
Yes.
before.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, if you're still thinking about it 20 years later, that was not platonic.
Exactly. Another lady, Anne C. Lynch, she was a New York writer, sculptor, tutor, socialite. She introduced Poe to kind of the New York Literary Society, the clique of the times. And she did this after The Raven was published, so a little bit after 1845. And then there was a scandal that came out about the two of them because there were some love letters passed between them. And so when this happened, so she could kind of remove herself from the situation, she took Poe off of her soiree list to, lessen the rumors and all that kind of stuff.
Typical
Cover up.
socialite, typical socialite scandal.
Yes.
That's just sad, even way back then.
It is. And then another lady whom was one of Poe's friends, her name is Sarah J. Hale. She was actually an editor at Godey's Lady's Book, which many stories and things were published that Poe wrote in there. One of them is A Cask of Amontillado. And she encouraged him a whole lot throughout his career and to keep writing and to keep going. She actually published a notice of Poe's work all Aroff when he was 21 to kind of help him, which I thought was really kind of cool.
Yeah.
Kind of some interesting side notes about her. She wrote Mary Had a Little Lamb.
Nice.
And she also encouraged Abraham Lincoln to make Thanksgiving a holiday,
That is just so weird.
to establish that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just to think about how just some women that, in history, it's still being glossed over about most of the most influential women.
Yes.
Because they were women. They were just supposed to be seen, not heard.
Exactly.
In some aspects, they were treated just as much property as anything else.
Right.
And for them to have such influence. But Mary had a little lamb. I mean, come on. That's one of the oldest nursery rhymes we
Yes.
all recite.
Everybody knows
Nobody really knows the history behind it because nobody wanted to learn the history behind it. But to know that she was the influence of Abraham Lincoln actually creating Thanksgiving as a federal holiday is extremely interesting.
Yes.
That, most people, because that's one of the things I used to teach when I taught American history, was the first Thanksgiving holiday being introduced
Absolutely.
as a federal holiday was by Lincoln. And then part of it was the Civil War, because he did that. He passed that law during the Civil War.
Yeah.
It was another thing that he was trying to push to bring the country back together again.
Right.
So to know that woman who wasn't his wife, but she was an influence, because Abraham Lincoln did seek out a lot of females and like Sojourner Truth and all that as influence. And he even spoke with Frederick Douglass and a lot of people he listened to help sway him.
And both of their birthdays are in February.
Exactly. See, February people. That's why we have presidents.
And I'm also a February baby as well.
Yes, that's February peoples. We got to hang.
23rd is mine, day
Yes.
after George Washington.
Yeah, see, and mine is, let's see, Abraham Lincoln's is the 12th.
12th, yes.
So I'm 2 days after Lincoln's. So I'm like, yay.
Yeah.
So February, it's a powerful month.
It is, even though it's the shortest month.
Exactly. Hey, sometimes shortness does not matter.
That's right. And so the last lady we're going to talk about is Sarah Helen Whitman, whom Poe met in 1848, and she definitely was a love interest, and she also was a poet. And it kind of makes sense that Poe, with the literary circles he was in, that he knew a lot of writers and poets and editors and things like that.
Absolutely.
And kind of would be interested having, those things in common.
They shared the same, ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. But they exchanged letters and poems as well. They were engaged, but she broke it off when he started drinking again. And so the second to Helen that was published in 1848 is for her.
Yes.
So he and so that was right before going back to Sarah Elmira Royster being engaged to her. So he, again, 1848 was a time of that, and 1849, a lot of ladies were.
Yeah, and he was once more going probably through a midlife crisis in his own right.
Yeah, because he was right at 40.
Yes, he was right at 40. He was looking for that influence again that Virginia sent to him. He was still recovering from the grief, the tragedy. He was seeking out the females in the literary circles because they were the ones that, could help see him and help lead him on the right path. And then, of course, he goes back to the beginning with Elmira, to where the very first love that he ever had way back before Virginia that he was destined to, you could actually say was his Omega.
Yes.
And it's like, oh, I'm going to end up where I should have started.
Exactly.
And unfortunately, his drinking and everything else was his true end.
Exactly. And, you kind of do that what if scenario of if they had been able to get married back then, would we have the works that came out of...
Exactly. Would we have the Poe that we have now? Because honestly, those tragic influences, I think, were what we were reading on those papers.
Yes.
And if we didn't have that tragedy, would we had those papers?
Exactly. We have the Poe we know because his life was so... I know that was really lame, but...
Yeah, it's okay. It was very rough.
Yeah,
it was very
off the top of my
apropos.
head. Yes, exactly.
Apropos.
Yes.
Sorry.
Oh, but...
I would say we're a little punch drunk, but we're not.
No.
This is weird.
And speaking of drinks, so for our Valentine special, my husband Jeff came up with 2 cocktails based on things that I and Jeanie pulled out of some of his works.
Yes.
And so what we did is we didn't look at all of his poems, but we looked at both of the To Helens. We looked at Lenore, and we looked at Eulalie, a song. For one of the cocktails, and some of the things that we pulled out were Perfume Sea, Hyacinth, just a theme of gold, which we ended up not using from Lenore, but then also moon tints of purple and pearl, violet eye, roses, silvery silken veil, violet bank, pearly luster, mossy banks, happy flowers, sea of pride, bright light, electric fire, repining trees, sweetly scintillating, or scintillate, excuse me. And so he came up with a cocktail that, for that one, that involves gin for all those floral notes.
Yes.
Moonshine, Saint Germain, which is also another liqueur that's very herbal and floral. And then creme de violet and sea salt.
Yes, you got to throw the sea salt in there because you got to have that little taste of the saltiness to downplay a lot of that floralness.
Exactly. You have to balance that out, and the sweetness.
Yes, and the sweetness.
But we called that Poe's Loves, and then we had to do one for Annabelle Lee,
of course.
And so we kind of focused on the kingdom by the sea, the demons down under the sea, angels envying her and me, moon never beams, and cloud by night.
Yes.
And so this one is going to be very green with with Midori, which is a melon liqueur, and then lemon for that sourness, and then moonshine, as well as an egg white, because sour drink, like if it's a true sour, it has an egg white. And so it's going to look very green with a puffy cloud of froth on top. And
very beachy feel, because you have the sway of the ocean, the froth from the tide.
Exactly.
You have the clouds floating in the sky,
and almost the tides of with the moon controlling that.
Yep.
And so this one we called The Envy of Love.
Exactly.
And we will have those up on our website in the next few days.
Yes.
For the recipes and with pictures.
Exactly. So when you want to kick back and read some love poetry to the significant other, you can pop on our website, look up some of these drink cocktails, and have some chocolate and some alcohol and have a nice little love fest.
Exactly.
It would be awesome.
Yes. And we decided to do a Valentine special. It just was very fitting, especially with Jeannie's birthday. And
with Poe and his loves of many.
Yes. All kinds of love.
The stalkerish love.
Yes. Yes. And so we will be back very soon, within the next couple weeks, with our surrealism episode, with our next Poe degree, one of our 6 degrees. And we hope you enjoyed learning about Valentine's and discussing love.
And so to end our program, we are going to put a quote from Tamerlane. For passionate love is still divine. I loved her as an angel might, with ray of all the living light, which blazes upon Edith's shrine. And with that,
we are Poe out.